called me boss earlier. Well, that's true. I'm his boss. I get to tell him what to do because he works for me. But the thing is, we both have way more important than King Jesus. He called. Hey, Frankie, you got a verse for us about this?
I'll do you one better than that, boss. I got two verses that came to mind as you were talking. The first one is Matthew 28:18, which is after Jesus rose from the dead. He came to the disciples and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." Wow! Isn't that something to think about? All authority in heaven and on earth. More authority than police officers, or principals, or even the president. In the Bible, Jesus is called the King of Kings. That's impressive. You take all the kings on earth together, and they don't have nearly as much power as Jesus. That should make us think twice before we disobey him. Now, that second verse is one that's always been a little confusing to me. It's John 14:15. And Jesus is talking to his disciples. He says to them, "If you love me, keep my command." I find that a little strange. Why would he say that? What does love have to do with obeying somebody? I'll let you explain this one, boss. I'm stumped.
Good question, Frankie. That verse can be a little bit tricky to understand. So, let me first ask you guys a question. Have you ever had a freshly made cannoli? Man, if you haven't, you're missing out. Every time I have one, it reminds me of my childhood. Whenever we'd go to my grandmother's, she'd feed us dinner, and then for dessert, cannolis. Anyway, if you get the chance, you got to try. But back to the lesson. Frankie's second verse, John 14:15. If you love me, keep my commands. Now first, I suppose we should probably define what love means. Otherwise, we're going to be all messed up about this. So what you guys need to know about love is this. It's more than a feeling. Love is really like a choice. It's a decision that you got to make. And when you love God, you want to make him happy. You want to please him. And when you love others, you want what's best for them, even if you don't always feel like it. And that's the thing. You're not always going to feel like listening to God, obeying him. But the more you love him, the more you will. Let's put this into perspective. God loved us so much that he sent his one and only son, as a little baby, to live a perfect life. And then when he died on the cross, he paid the punishment for our sin. Then when King Jesus rose from the dead, he made it possible for all of us to live together in heaven with him someday. Now that is the greatest gift ever. And we ought to be thankful for that. In return, love him back. And what did Jesus say was one of the ways we can show our love for him? By obeying him. So, when we don't, it's an awful thing. Let me give you a picture. Imagine if when my grandmother had given me that freshly made cannoli, what if I slapped her right in the face? It'd be a terrible thing, and it doesn't make any sense. Also, it would show her that I don't appreciate the gift she had just given to me. Think about it.
Hey boss, thanks for sharing. That was a really good example. I could never imagine slapping my grandmother in the face, let alone after she'd given me a cannoli. You got me thinking back to my childhood, about that love thing. I didn't realize it was more than just a feeling. I think it's probably how we use the word love. Because sometimes I'll say, I love me a good pizza. That's a lot different than the way I love my grandmother. See, because with my grandmother, I make sure to help her out, even when I don't feel like it. I drive her to the store to buy groceries. I help her clean her house because she doesn't get around so good anymore. I guess I did know what love is, I just didn't have the right words for it. And when it comes to God, he really has given us the greatest gift. And so, out of love for him, we should show our gratefulness by obeying him. That explains why we don't rob banks anymore. You're like a slap in the face to King Jesus. Because after all, he's the boss. Right, boss?
Right, Frankie. I couldn't have said it better myself. That Frankie guy, he's making me proud. He pays attention to what I got to say, and then he uses it to make changes in his life. I appreciate that. So, to get a bigger picture on this, let's look at a few more verses. In John chapter 15, Jesus is talking to his disciples again. He talked to those guys a lot, eh? All right, here goes. Starting in verse 9, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. Will remain in my love. Just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. All right, there's a lot in there. But Frankie, I'm going to let you take this one. I think you can handle it.
Hey, boss. So about those cannoli. I'm looking at my aunt's recipe. I just found it. I didn't know what went into these things. Oh, yeah, right. Sorry, boss. I'll do better next time. Alright, here goes. First things first, we should notice that in these verses, Jesus is talking about how the Father has loved him and how he has loved us. Then, later, he talks about laying down your life for your friends. That's amazing, because that's exactly what he did. When he died on the cross, he was laying down his life for us. So Jesus never asks us to do something that he doesn't do himself. He leads by example. He says that if he keeps his commands, we will remain in his love. Well, this is important, and actually, this is what Miss Vilma was telling us on the first night of AWANA. She said how God loves us unconditionally. That means no matter what. She also said how if we don't obey him, we won't always feel that love he has for us. Well, I think that's what Jesus is saying here. When we obey his commands, we'll have a closer relationship with him, and we'll be able to feel his love a whole lot easier. And he goes on to say something very interesting. He says that we're his friends if we do what he commands. So Jesus is our boss, but he's also our friend. Hey, that sounds a lot like something I said earlier. Alright, what do you think, boss? Did I sum it up pretty well?
Nailed it, Frankie. I think that's exactly what Jesus is saying here. It bothers him when our relationship with him isn't what it should be. And when we disobey him, which is sin, by the way, like pushing him away. And this ties into another verse that came to my mind. That would be Ephesians 4, verse 30. And do receive the Holy Spirit, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. That's kind of scratchy. That word grieve there, does anyone know what that means? It means to make really sad. You got it. And so we don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to make God sad. He loves us way too much for us to want to do that. What was the next thing I was going to say? All right. So there's something else we should notice in this verse too. You see how it says, with whom you were sealed for the day of redemption? That's another tricky one. What does it mean? What is this sealing business going on? Well, Jennifer talked about this one too. She said that when we choose to join God's team, we get sealed. And it's kind of like wearing a uniform. When you're wearing the uniform, you represent God, and it shows which team you're on. But when we disobey God, it makes him and the rest of the team look bad. Why do you think that is? Well, it actually ties into another thing that Ms. Vilma talked about. It's not showing integrity. If we really believe on the inside that God's the boss that he's the king of the universe, then we ought to show that on the outside by our actions. All right, Frankie, you want to start getting things wrapped up for us here?
Wow, boss. Seems like you've been paying attention to these lessons like the rest of us. So you're not asking us to do anything that you didn't do yourself. We're really all in this together. What about those cannolis? Just kidding, I'm messing with you. I'm actually remembering another lesson that Miss Vilma shared with us a few weeks ago. The one about the son that asked his dad for all that money and then went and wasted it all. I'm guessing that made his dad really sad that he did that, and it hurt their relationship. When the son went away to do stuff that his dad didn't approve of, things weren't the same between them. But when he came back and asked for the forgiveness, everything was restored. They got back to the way they used to be. So God is willing to forgive us, but it's better to listen in the first place. What happens when we obey the first time, boss?
I'm glad you asked, Frankie, because that's actually the final point that I wanted to make tonight. So, God is so good that he actually offers us rewards, bucks, doing things his way. So, it should be enough that we obey him out of gratefulness for the gift that he gave us, that we obey him because we don't want to make him sad, but he goes beyond even that. He wants to bless us with spiritual riches. So there's a few verses that'll cover that. You guys want to say this one with me? Matthew 6:19-21. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. Treasure is, there your heart will be also. All right, so I'm going to explain these with something that my grandmother used to say to me as a little boy. She'd say, now Johnny, that's my real name by the way. When you're on God's team, you get two bank accounts. One that you put earthly money in will represent this with cash. The second that you put heavenly treasures in, this one will be diamonds. And the way this works is God offers to put those diamonds in your heavenly bank account when you obey him. And you get different sized diamonds for the difficulty of what he's asking you to do. Asks you to do something easy, you get a little diamond. Something harder, you get a bigger one. It's kind of like his incentive because he loves us so much. And the thing with that earthly money is you can't take it with you to heaven. When you get to heaven, as far as money goes, all that matters is those diamonds. So I wish I would have understood this a lot earlier in life. Because back when I was in the mafia, I just spent all my time trying to make as much earthly money as I could. And I didn't care about what God wanted from me. So I wasted a lot of time. There's something else about those verses that we should cover before I let you guys go. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What does that mean? Jesus, what does treasure have to do with my heart? Well, this is how it works. When you show God how much you love him by obeying him, and you store up those diamonds in your heavenly bank account, that's where your treasure is. And then you're going to love him even more. But if you make something else more important than God, and that's where you put your treasure, then you're not going to love God as much. And that's pretty sad. So I'm going to leave with one request. I've shared a couple stories about my grandmother. And she was the one that taught me so much about God. And so I'm asking you to say thank you to someone that's taken the time to share with you about God, either your parents or your grandparents, because my grandmother, she passed away before I decided to follow Jesus. And so I never got to thank her for doing all that for me. So with that, Frankie, I'm going to ask you to close us out here.
Wow, boss, we've talked about a lot of different things tonight. We talked about what it means to follow Jesus. We talked about what love means and why loving God should make us want to obey Him. We've talked about how He's the boss, but also our friend. You know, the Bible calls God our Father, and that really is a big piece of the puzzle. He loves us and cares for us. He's in charge, and He's also our friend. That's an amazing thing. We don't want to grieve God, or in other words, make Him sad. And that thing your grandma taught you about the bank account we have in heaven? That's gold! Pun intended. I'm going to remember that one. You know, maybe I'll have to say some stories about my grandparents sometime. Well, anyways, it's been nice talking to you guys. I hope you learned something. I sure did. Bye for now. I'm sure we'll meet again.